Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is CityTalk. She was kidnapped, ripped away from her family, trafficked, beaten, treated in the worst sort of ways, body broken, and when she finally struck out, killing one of her abusers, was executed. She's Topsy, the broken-tailed elephant, and the subject of Michael Daly's biography and social history, Topsy, the startling story of the crooked-tailed elephant, P.T. Barnum, and the American wizard, Thomas Edison. I love this stuff in the Daily News, and now with Newsweek, the Daily Beast. In 2002, Michael was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. He's the author of 2 other books, Underground and The Book of Mychal. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
You love elephants. What is it about elephants that so captivates you?
Well, it's one of those feelings that you have to think about for a long time, like why? And I think that ultimately it is that they're so big that they could pretty much do whatever they wanted to you, but they don't. I mean, if you look in their eyes, they've got these big, long-lashed eyes, and they're benevolent. And it makes you think that, I mean, sometimes the way humans behave makes you think that nature is all about dominance of power and teeth and claws and survival of the fittest. And if you look at an elephant, all of a sudden you think, well, maybe there's another dimension to it all. Maybe that's not just what it is. And then when you start to study them a little bit, you find out, first of all, they're smart enough to get rid of all the adult males from the herd right away. Get rid of
Smart! I mean, that's it. You get rid of all the trouble.
They let them come back for 30 seconds to do what they got to do, and then get rid of them.
That's all that's needed.
And then the herd's run by the senior female. It's not because she's dominant or she's the most powerful. It's because she knows the most, because she's been around the most. And it's just a whole other kind of theory of existence.
You open with speculation based on your research on elephants about what it would be like in the herd and what it might have been like in capture and transfer and all the miles that she traveled. How did you do that? What was the nature of the research that you did to sort of really empathize with and sort of get into the head of an elephant?
You do a lot of reading. I mean, they're journals from the time, from the late 1800s, of actual captures of elephants. You know how they captured elephants. There's been a lot of written about how elephants relate to each other in the herd, and you kind of just combine the two. And you know that when an elephant's born, all the other members of the herd pitch in and take care of the elephant. And interestingly enough, when they start moving, they move at the speed of the baby. And the baby has to make the baby's own way, except for when they swim. And then sometimes the mother will hold the baby up when they're swimming, because the baby hasn't yet learned how to control its trunk so it can
use it
breathe.
as a, right. Talking about swimming, one of the great stories of many in the book is elephants swimming to Staten Island.
Well, the reason I ended up doing this book really was I ran across a little tiny article that described that there were these 2 guys fishing off the coast of Staten Island at 4 in the morning. You had to figure they had to be drinking, so that they, and then out of the early morning darkness comes this sound like Judgment Day, this trumpeting, and then this form comes towards them, and they start rowing towards shore, and it keeps coming after them, and they keep rowing, it keeps coming, and they go right up on the beach, and right up on the beach behind them comes an elephant. And like, from where? And so they take it to the cops, and the cops look at it and know it's not from Staten Island, so they put it down as a vagrant. And then a couple days later, a guy shows up from Coney Island and says, yeah, that's my elephant. And it had swum 5 miles from Coney Island to Staten Island. So the guy's gonna bring her back, and elephants like cocaine and they like whiskey, so they gave the elephant a little cocaine, a little whiskey, and walked her across Staten Island, and then took the ferry to Manhattan, walked across Manhattan, took the ferry to Brooklyn, walked the whole length to Brooklyn, arrived at Coney Island. And the elephant guy says to the owner of the amusement park, you know, these are really good elephants. I mean, they're really good elephants. They were performing in Times Square. They weren't bothering anybody. They're like happy elephants. But since they got here, they started getting nutty again. And he pointed to a deserted part of the amusement park and said, particularly over there. The guy goes, oh, I know what it is. And he gets some of his guys and says, dig that up over there. And it was where the head of Topsy, the executed elephant, had been buried 3 years before. And these elephants, I mean, it's not like there's an elephant newspaper that told them, you know.
Right, or the elephant internet, right.
Right,
Right.
no, so, you know, they sensed something bad had happened to one of their own there. And there's a description in this tiny, you know, there's sometimes a little article can tell like a whole book in
Right,
6
go ahead.
paragraphs or something.
Right.
And just describe these other elephants, these Times Square elephants standing in a circle as these guys were digging. And when they found what they found, they let out this mournful kind of trumpeting. So.
And then you decide you're going to write a book?
So I figured, you know, all right, what happened to this elephant? You almost, you know, when something's that tender, you almost feel an obligation to see whether it's a story you should write.
What was your reaction the first time you saw that 24-second movie?
Well, I saw
Edison
that.
movie?
It was so bad I wasn't going to do the book. But then actually I started Googling a little bit about Topsy. What happened was I did a book about some dear friends who were killed at the Trade Center. And I was looking for something very different to do. And the editor said, why don't you do some, you know, you've done a lot of crime, mainly because there was like a war going on in this town for a couple of years.
Right.
So do some crime from long ago. So I'm looking back and you figure, well, if it's a crime worth writing about, somebody probably got executed. So I'm looking at executions. And then there's this elephant. And then I look, and then I'd heard a little bit about, you know, everybody's kind of heard about Topsy.
Right.
And I looked at this YouTube, and first of all, I couldn't believe it was on, I mean, this thing out of the past is right there.
Yeah.
And
110 years
so
old.
bad, like I can't write that. And then, but then I did a little Googling, and I came across the swimming. And I said, man, that elephant's name was Fanny, by the way. So I figured, you know, and I love Coney Island, and I spent a lot of time on the beach there, and I went back to the beach, and I just thought of Fanny, you know.
Swimming.
Just getting out and just heading out to sea. And, you know, I figured that part of Fanny must have remembered coming across the water. There must have been an ocean. Back. You know, this was like some thing to go home, and then all of a sudden you run into a couple drunks from Staten Island.
Right, and you end up on Staten Island. Oh, my God.
So I figured, you know, why not do this elephant? So.
Any aha moments?
There are actually kind of a whole lot of them. It was more a story where it got so grim that, you know, like, how do you keep going? But then there would be these kind of things that would uplift you and keep you going. Like, you know, these poor elephants, I mean, they were beaten, terrorized, and they almost never responded, in kind, in which they could have at any moment. But you get these, then all of a sudden you find out there's a guy named Stuart Craven who just understood elephants. I mean, he would ride 1 foot on top of an elephant, which doesn't seem that remarkable unless you know something about elephants, is that skin is really loose up there. So to be able to ride 1 foot up there, you got to anticipate where this elephant's going. Sure. You got to really know your elephants.
Yeah.
So he ended
elephant surfing.
Right, and he kind of followed the way of the day, which was to beat elephants.
Right.
Submission, and then it reached to such an extreme, he decided that maybe that's not the way to go, and he discovered that if you're actually kind to them,
what a concept.
You do better. I mean, the idea of not beating them, and he turned out to be the greatest elephant trainer ever.
And in fact, I mean, he is one of only very few heroes in this book. There aren't too many overt villains. But there aren't many heroes, and he's one of them.
There are a lot of humans.
Right, a lot of humans. Thank you, thank you. Okay, let's go to the story and the humans. How did Topsy get her name, and how did she get her curly tail? Which, you know, we'll segue out of it.
She got her name as you know, it's from Uncle Tom's Cabin. There's the character Topsy who says, you know, how'd you get big? I just growed, you know.
And they grow immensely. I mean, you talk about the immense quantities of food they eat in the pounds.
300 pounds a day, and
wow.
They keep growing and growing, and that's how she got her name. Because just growing.
Right.
Because she came as a little baby. And more often, elephants would come more fully grown. So for her to come this small, because she was smuggled into America on the first American centennial because this circus owner Forepart figured he'd pass her off
as the first one
American
born, right, which was a big deal.
Oh, yeah, that would have been huge. And, you know, the American centennial, we got the first elephant born here, and plus it was also a good time to, you know, you want to hook into the patriotism.
Sure.
And then it didn't pan out because he happened to use the same agent as his rival Barnum. So he ended up getting so furious about this whole thing as he beat Topsy so badly that her tail was crooked, and it was crooked for the rest of her days.
Okay, how does she come to her end? How does she get electrocuted in 1903? What's the immediate cause and sort of walking back?
The circus is in Brooklyn on Halsey Street, and this drunk comes sneaking into the tent, the elephant tent, early in the morning, and starts going down the line with elephants. He's got a glass of whiskey, and they do like whiskey. They don't like guys who've been drinking because they know what that means, but they do like whiskey. So he's going down, he keeps pulling it back, holding out, pulling it back, and he gets to Topsy finally, and she opens her mouth and he throws a lit cigar in her mouth. And I think Topsy at that point had been beaten and tormented and tortured for about 2 decades, and finally that was it. And she killed him. I mean, and the speed with which she killed him and the ease with which she killed him tells you something about what elephants could do at any time if they were so inclined.
Right.
And the thing to remember about her is that after that, she didn't raise her hand to anybody else. And the circus thought, well, it was kind of viewed as justifiable homicide at the time, even by the circus. And the next day they had a picture of the Brooklyn Eagle of her and everything was fine. But the circus figured, well, maybe we ought to sell it just to be cautious. So they sold it to a guy who was opening the first amusement park in Coney Island named Boynton, who was world famous at that point for floating on his back down in an inflatable suit down all the great rivers of the world. He was known as the Fearless Frogman. And his main attraction was he built this water chute, and he would go down the chute on his back and then paddle around in his suit and cook omelets and play the trumpet.
This is mass entertainment. I mean, Coney Island is amusing the millions. I mean,
That's right. It's just starting. This is the first amusement park. This is the first stirring of what it's going to be. And so he figures, well, he'll get this elephant and he'll train the elephant to go down the chute. It'd be great. Elephants like to swim, you know, everybody'd be happy. But it rained every day almost that whole season, and he went broke. So some guys across the street who had an enclosed attraction called Trip to the Moon, which simulated going to the moon, and it ended with guys giving you green cheese, little guys giving you green cheese. But so they bought they bought him out, right? And they're using Topsy to move their stuff across Surf Avenue, and they hire another drunk trainer, and he's beaten her so badly that the cops collar him twice, and which gives you an idea how badly. And you got to remember, she did not raise her hand to this trainer.
Right.
I mean, the supposed ferocious elephant took it. And then the second time, the cops are leading the guy into the station house in Coney Island there, and elephants, they walk almost silently because they walk kind of on their tiptoes. They're very oddly quiet. And Topsy was right behind them, I think, probably without them knowing it. And then she went right up behind him and got stuck in the station house door and scared the Jesus out of the sergeant, and he wasn't too happy. And if you're opening a new amusement park in Coney Island, one thing you don't want is to be on the wrong side of the cops. So they basically tell the cops, all right, we're going to take care of Topsy. And they announce they're going to execute Topsy and sell tickets, and Thomas Edison gets wind of it. And he had been in a long struggle with Westinghouse. Edison did invent the electric light bulb. He actually developed it a little after he announced he had invented it. But he backed direct current, which the drawback of that is you couldn't transmit it more than a couple of blocks. So you would have had to have a power station every 10 blocks in the city, and you couldn't have had power at all outside the city.
Crazy.
Meanwhile, Westinghouse backs, with the help of this Serbian nut genius who fell in love with a pigeon named Tesla.
Right.
He develops a way to effectively use alternating current, which can be transmitted from Niagara to Buffalo, New York, everywhere. So he's going to lose Edison. So the only way he figures he's going to win is he tries to scare people, contrary to scientific fact, into believing that alternating current is somehow much more dangerous than direct current.
Right.
So he does all these fugazi experiments executing dogs. That
And a
doesn't
horse.
work. A horse he did, a cow, didn't work. So he decides, well, maybe we'll do people. So he develops the electric chair through a proxy. And they try to get...
And this is supposed to be a more humane way of killing.
Yeah, supposedly. And
Go
as
ahead.
Westinghouse said, it would have been more humane to have used an axe. But so they try to get Edison's press agent tries to get all the reporters to call it being Westinghoused when you put the,
Instead of electrocuted,
so-and-so,
okay.
was, the Rosenbergs were Westinghoused. But that didn't work. So Edison lost. And he expended so much of his fortune trying to beat Westinghouse, trying to pull off this huge lie, that he lost control of his company.
Right.
So Edison Electric became General Electric.
Right.
He then, having lost his name from the company that embodied what he had invented, he puts his name on something he had not invented, the movie camera.
Right.
And now he's got this movie camera, and he's got this animus towards, he's really going to show people what electricity can do. So,
Right.
I mean, he combines the two. All right, I can electrocute this elephant as a kind of final to the world, and I can film it. And it's going to be the first film of anything that actually died.
And it's that 25 seconds of Topsy being executed.
Topsy's revenge is, and it took me a while to realize this, is that when you see her being led in this film up to be executed, the guy next to her isn't scared.
Right.
Right? No one's scared of this elephant. They have to adjust the electrodes so she raises her foot completely cooperatively. I mean, that is the benevolence of elephants on display, followed by the savagery of humans. In preparation for executing her, the Edison and the amusement park people got together, their press agents, and put it out that Topsy had killed all these people, was this ferocious man killer. And you look at this film, it's just clearly just not true. And I think when you think about what's horrifying, is not just that they killed this elephant, but that the elephant was so manifestly harmless.
This seems to be striking parallels to the human condition in that.
It does, yeah.
In terms of the quote unquote the criminal justice system. Let's go to the two characters that are on the face of the cover, P.T. Barnum and Thomas Edison. Bonham is a real character, and he's part of this conflict with Forepaugh, and Edison's in a conflict with Westinghouse. So you've got these two competitions here. Barnum is a wonderful character. You seem to suggest that he's almost representative of the zeitgeist. Give us a little bit of flavor of P.T. Barnum and the bunkum.
Yeah, he was he was a rascal. I mean, he was, he once said, "I have not gold, but I have a lot of brass." And, he was the big guy who he started out passing off a woman supposedly as the 300-year-old wet nurse of George Washington. He went from there, and then when she died, he sold tickets to the autopsy. I mean, he was nuts. And he had the museum. Talking about geniuses, a guy came, he opens this new museum, the Barnum Museum in downtown Manhattan. And a guy comes to him and asks for a handout. He says, "I won't give you a handout," but he said, "I'll give you a job." He said, "What I want you to do is I want you to take these 4 bricks. And I want you to start going around the museum to different corners, and I want you to stop and leave a brick at the corner. Go to the next corner, leave a brick. Keep doing that, collecting the bricks and leaving the bricks, until you have a crowd who's wondering what you're doing, and then walk into the museum." And the whole crowd would follow, but they got to pay to see what the guy's doing.
Right.
Well, the guy would go out the back door and start again with the bricks. I mean, he was...
What I love is that he would produce letters saying that his own exhibition was a fraud.
Oh yeah, so everybody would go to see it.
And then they would all go to see it.
That's right.
And then what I found also astounding is the use of the pickpockets, and the pickpockets sort of being in cahoots
that was
with the
more
circus.
the other circus,
That's
but all
the other
circuses.
circus. And the rubes were taken before they got in.
The other guy, Forepaugh, I mean, Barnum was, his big thing is his revolution in circuses really was he stopped his guys from stealing from the public. And he became known as the Sunday show.
That's exactly right.
The decent show.
That's exactly
the other
right.
guy, the money was too good because they would sit down at the beginning of the season. They say, "All right, you can pickpocket everybody. They'd either do a flat rate or they would get a cut of it." And then all the stuff that got stolen would get sent to New York to a particular jeweler. All these big boxes of pocket watches and everything stolen from people out in Minnesota or something. And they would have these pickpockets just go through the crowd. They were brilliant at getting people from under the grandstand. And if someone tried to chase a thief out, the thief would get away, and then if the guy tried to come back in, they would tell him, you got to pay.
Again.
He doesn't have any money left, so he can't come in, and that'd be it. And they had guys, especially, they called them Monday guys, because when the show was in town, they would go and rob all the laundry.
Oh, because everybody was at
Everybody's
the
at the
circus.
They'd rob everybody's laundry.
Barnum is somehow illustrative. What is it about the age, the Gilded Age? What is it about the circus that is, in a sense, you almost argue it's a national unifying force?
Well, it is. There's a thing called a circus route book, which describes each stop and gives a little like thumbnail of the town that they stopped in. And every town was making something. It was the world's biggest producer of matchsticks, or they produced more bricks than anybody else, or iron ore. Or and it was a time when America was actually generating true wealth. I mean, actually, we were actually making things.
Right.
If you went into the Walmart of that time, it was all made in America, and it was all made from American raw materials, and so you had all this huge generation of wealth, but to generate that required a lot of drudgery. I mean, that required the guys to make the bricks, to make the matchsticks, and all this, and their one escape was that the circus would come. And it was often such a draw that the employers, even the cruelest capitalists, would kind of say, characters. Well, why bother? We're going to have a circus day because everybody's going to say their grandmother's
So it was that big.
Yeah, it was that big, and it was the one escape. And also, I think there was also a feeling that if you're making those matchsticks, you're sending them out into the world.
Right.
And finally, the world's coming to you. That you've sent everything you spent all day, 8 hours a day, making this, and sending it out to people you have no idea. You're isolated, and all of a sudden the world comes to you with all these fabulous things. And for a relatively small amount of money, you can just go in and enjoy it.
What about Edison? Edison, in a sense, is the next purveyor of mass entertainment, at least through the movies and phonographs.
He didn't even think it was going to be entertainment.
No,
he thought
it
was
going to be educational.
I think he's an example of one of those things. If you heard of somebody, they're probably no good. He said that he liked being deaf because then he didn't have to listen to people.
That tells you something.
He was a brilliant guy. I mean, there's a thing in science where there's like a gradation. There's Pasteur up here, where you explore and then do great things for people, and it's because you have knowledge.
Right.
And then there's people that just kind of tinker around and come across with these.
Well, there's scientists and there's inventors.
Yeah, and Edison really didn't understand how electricity worked, which is one of the reasons why he embraced DC. So I mean, to the end, right after he lost and everything, he turned to his assistant and said, "I don't really know how this stuff works."
And also you point out that, his sort of harebrained scheme of producing iron ore, and, he went from one failure to really a harebrained scheme.
Well, he was determined that he was going to show the world. He was going to top what he did with the light bulb. He lost control of the light bulb, but he's going to show him. He's going to do something bigger. And the big thing that was needed at that time of building was iron ore, and a lot of the mines around Jersey had been exhausted, and he was going to take out the stuff that had a relatively small amount in it and going to produce it. He was going to make a fortune and all this, but then, some guy out in Minnesota found the biggest deposit of stuff in the world, and he didn't need to do this. So you kind of end up feeling kind of bad for him.
Really?
Well,
I came away saying, oh man, this guy's not as, he's not only the wizard, but there's something else about him.
Yeah, well, he's kind of like the opposite of the Wizard of Oz. He's like, he's a pretty good wizard, but he's a lousy man.
Okay.
Okay. You know that scene in the Wizard of Oz?
Yes,
he said, I'm not a bad man. I'm just not a very good wizard.
Right.
It's the opposite.
Oh, okay. So. Excellent. Let's move from then to now. I mean, you still write. You still are an observer. Even though the timing of this is crazy in terms of what's going on. Anthony Weiner. Let's just close with Anthony Weiner. I mean, if there's anything about the 2013 election, it's Anthony Weiner. And you've written, quite a bit about it in the Daily Beast. Just as a close prior to, and subsequent to an election. Come on, what?
I think even Barnum's press agent couldn't have saved him. That second. The first one, Barnum could have taken care of the first one. He would have been fine. But it was that second thing where he said, well, because, he wasn't asking, now he's not asking for a second chance, he's asking for a third chance.
Oh, right.
And the thing about New York City is that it's the fairest place on earth, I think. And I think everybody was willing to say, okay, when he said, I messed up and all this, everybody was willing to forgive him.
Right.
But I think that when you tell someone, I'm sorry, and you ask for forgiveness, it's kind of implicit you're saying, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Right.
Right?
Well, having done it anyway.
Right. I learned my lesson,
Right.
basically what you're telling
Right.
people. And people say, all right, he learned his lesson, give him a chance.
Right.
Well, then he comes back and says, well, I learned it, but I didn't quite learn it until
Really?
after you might have thought I learned it.
Didn't work.
And
so one comeback bit the dust. The other one is Elliot Spitzer, and we'll see.
But the interesting thing about Weiner
Go.
is that, and what shocked a lot of people was how big he was in the black community before the second line.
Yep.
A lot of
Spitzer
people were
too.
stunned. Yeah.
Spitzer too.
Well, because I think there was just a feeling that at least these guys will shake things up. At
Right.
least these guys will change things.
Yep.
Because New York's had this huge renaissance.
Right. But
Unless
it's
you're
left
in
a lot of
Brownsville.
people out. Right. Right. And I
And-
think they were the anti-establishment candidate.
That's right.
We'll have to see. We'll talk about it. My thanks to Michael Daly for being on the show and for a special book, Topsy, the Startling Story of the Crooked-Tailed Elephant, P.T. Barnum, and the American Wizard, Thomas Edison. It's a great read. Read it. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.